A chance encounter on Starlight Bridge. The city of Willow Creek was a place of stark contrasts. On one side, towering skyscrapers stretched toward the sky, bathed in golden lights, home to the city's wealthiest and most powerful families. On the other, a labyrinth of crumbling streets and dimly lit alleyways housed those struggling to survive day by day. In the middle of it all, separating the two worlds, stood Starlight Bridge, a relic from an older time, offering both breathtaking views and a quiet place for those seeking solace. Jaden Carter, a 14-year-old boy from Willow Creek's poorest district, adjusted the strap of his worn-out sack slung over his shoulder. Inside, a collection of discarded cans and bottles clinked with every step he took. Dressed in a faded t-shirt with a hole near the hem, patched-up jeans, and sneakers that had long lost their soles, Jaden was no stranger to hardship. Life had been unkind, but Jaden never let it break him. He had a mother to care for, dreams to hold on to, and a will stronger than steel. His mother, Marie Carter, had spent her life working low-paying cleaning jobs, but an illness had left her too weak to continue. Now it was Jaden who took on the burden of survival, collecting recyclables during the day and selling them for whatever little he could earn. It wasn't much, but it kept food on the table. Despite his struggles, Jaden was not a boy who wallowed in misery. He found joy in the smallest things: a kind word from a stranger, a piece of bread shared with a hungry stray, the way the city skyline glowed in the evening. His optimism was his greatest weapon against the cruelty of the world. Tonight was no different. The bridge was his escape, a place where he could take a deep breath and let himself dream. But just as he leaned against the railing, gazing at the endless cityscape, something caught his attention. A girl. She stood at the far end of the bridge, perched on the railing, as if she were about to jump. Jaden's heart pounded. He had seen desperation before. He had lived it. But never like this. Never this close to the edge. He dropped his sack, the bottles clinking loudly against the pavement. But the girl didn't turn. She was frozen in place, lost in her own despair. "Hey," Jaden called out, his voice sharp with urgency. The girl flinched but didn't move away from the edge. "What are you doing? It's dangerous up there." He took a cautious step forward, hands raised as if approaching a wounded animal. "Go away." Her voice was barely a whisper, carried by the wind. Jaden's breath caught. She was younger than him, maybe 12 or 13, with blonde hair cascading over her shoulders. Her dress, a pristine white, was completely out of place in the dirty, grimy reality of the city streets. But it wasn't her appearance that struck Jaden. It was the look in her eyes, a look that spoke of absolute hopelessness. He knew that look. He had seen it in his mother's eyes on nights when she thought he wasn't watching. He couldn't walk away. "Maybe I don't understand what you're going through," Jaden said, stepping a little closer. "But I know one thing. Whatever it is, this isn't the way to fix it." The girl let out a broken laugh, but there was no humor in it. "You wouldn't say that if you were me, if you knew how trapped I am." Jaden hesitated. Trapped? She looked like someone who had everything: a family, a home, security. How could she possibly feel trapped? "Look at me," Jaden said, spreading his arms wide. "I live in a shack with holes in the roof. My mom is sick, and I pick up trash just to make sure we have something to eat." He exhaled, trying to keep his voice steady. "But I still wake up every morning. I still find something to hold on to. Because I have her. Because I have hope." The girl finally turned to face him, her blue eyes brimming with tears. "But you're happy?" Her voice cracked. Jaden shrugged. "Not all the time. But I try, because I know things can get better." He took another cautious step. "Do you have anyone? Parents? Friends? People who care about you?" The girl's lips trembled. "My parents care. But they don't understand. They just want me to be perfect." She let out a shaky breath. "I can't be what they want me to be." Jaden sighed, nodding. "Maybe instead of trying to be perfect, You should just be you. Let them see who you really are." Silence stretched between them. For a long moment, the only sound was the distant hum of the city, the cars rushing below the bridge, and the wind whistling through the rails. Then, with a deep, shuddering breath, the girl stepped down from the railing and collapsed to her knees, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Jaden knelt beside her, resting a gentle hand on her shoulder. "What's your name?" he asked softly. "Emily," she whispered. Jaden smiled. "Nice to meet you, Emily. My name's Jaden. You're coming with me tonight. My place isn't fancy, but it's safe. We'll figure things out together, okay?" Emily looked up at him, her tear-streaked face showing the faintest glimmer of hope. For the first time in what felt like forever, she nodded. Jaden stood, offering her his hand. She took it hesitantly, and together, they walked off the bridge, leaving behind the despair that once threatened to swallow her whole. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy. Two lives, so different yet so alike, had just become intertwined in ways neither could have ever expected, and neither of them knew it yet. But that night was just the beginning. A world apart, yet closer than ever. The night air in Willow Creek was thick with the scent of rain-soaked pavement and distant car exhaust. As Jaden led Emily through the labyrinth of narrow alleys and dimly lit streets, the contrast between their worlds became painfully clear. Emily's feet hesitated on the uneven ground. This place was nothing like the gated communities, pristine sidewalks, and luxurious homes she had grown up in. The air was heavier here, filled with the echoes of muffled conversations behind crumbling walls, and the distant sounds of life pressing forward despite the hardship. Jaden glanced over his shoulder. "You okay?" Emily swallowed, hugging her arms around herself. "Yeah, it's just different." Jaden smirked. "That's one way to put it." They turned a corner, and Emily noticed how the buildings here weren't just old, they were tired. Windows were either broken or boarded up, the walls covered in graffiti. Some of it vibrant and artistic, some just angry scrawls of frustration. Streetlights flickered unreliably, casting eerie shadows across cracked sidewalks. For a fleeting moment, Emily felt a strange mix of fear and awe. She had always seen neighborhoods like these from the safety of a car window. But now she was here, walking through them. The fear wasn't because of the people. It was because, for the first time, she was stepping into a world her parents had always warned her about. A world that wasn't as lifeless and dangerous as she had been led to believe. Jaden finally stopped in front of a small weathered shack tucked between two taller, rundown buildings. The structure was a patchwork of salvaged wood and rusted metal, with a single window covered by a curtain that had once been white, but was now stained with time. The dim glow of a lamp flickered inside. "Welcome home," Jaden said, pushing open the door. Emily hesitated at the entrance, her gaze sweeping across the modest space. It wasn't just small, it was practically one room. A tiny kitchen corner with a dented stove, a rickety table with two mismatched chairs, a cot neatly made in the corner, and a stack of worn blankets folded beside it. Jaden set his sack of recyclables down with a sigh of relief. "Mom, I'm home." From the cot, a frail but warm-eyed woman stirred. Her face was lined with exhaustion, but when she saw Jaden, her expression softened into a weary smile. "Jaden, who's this?" she asked gently. Emily felt awkward under the woman's tired gaze, but Jaden spoke up. "Mom, this is Emily. She needed a place to stay for the night." Murray's eyes flickered with concern but not disapproval. "Sweetheart, are you all right?" Emily bit her lip, unsure of how to respond. No one had ever asked her that with such genuine care. I think so," she murmured. Marie nodded, gesturing toward the table. "Come, sit. You must be exhausted." Emily obeyed, lowering herself onto one of the old chairs while Jaden rummaged through the kitchen. "We don't have much, but we got tea," he said as he placed a battered kettle on the stovetop. "Mom says tea fixes everything." Marie chuckled. A warm drink and a kind word go a long way, don't they? Emily watched as Jaden moved around the tiny kitchen with ease, pulling out 3 chipped mugs and pouring the steaming tea with careful precision. There was something comforting about the way they worked together, a rhythm built on necessity, trust, and love. As she took a sip, Emily exhaled. It was simple, but somehow it was the best thing she had tasted in days. She glanced at Marie, then at Jaden. "How do you do it?" Marie tilted her head. "Do what, dear?" Emily hesitated before speaking. "Smile. Laugh. Find joy. In this." She gestured around the small shack, unable to hide her disbelief. "I mean, you have so little, but you seem happy." Marie exchanged a knowing look with Jaden before answering. "Happiness isn't about what you have, sweetheart. It's about who you have." Jaden grinned. "And we got each other. That's enough." Emily lowered her gaze. She had a mansion, the best clothes, private tutors, and a future planned down to the smallest detail. But she had never felt this warmth before. "You can stay here tonight," Marie said gently. "It's not much, but you're safe here." Emily hesitated, feeling a lump form in her throat. No one had ever made her feel like she belonged anywhere before. For the first time in her life, she whispered, "Thank you. Morning light, and a new perspective." Emily woke to the sound of faint clinking and rustling. Sunlight streamed through the tattered curtain, casting golden streaks across the tiny room. She sat up and blinked. Jaden was already awake, sorting through his sack of recyclables in the corner. His movements were precise, practiced, the routine of someone who had been doing this for far too long. Mary sat at the table, folding clothes with careful hands. "Good morning, sweetheart," she said warmly when she noticed Emily stirring. Emily stretched, feeling a dull ache in her limbs. The cot had been uncomfortable compared to her feathered mattress at home, but somehow she had slept more peacefully than she ever had. Jaden glanced at her with a smirk. "You sleep okay, princess?" Emily frowned at the nickname, but Jaden only laughed. Marie placed a small plate of toast and a slice of fruit in front of Emily. "Eat up. Jaden has work to do, and I think you should see what he does for a living." Emily hesitated. "See what?" Jaden tossed her a smaller sack, grinning. "You'll see." And with that, they stepped out into the world together, one born into privilege, the other into struggle, yet somehow walking side by side. Emily had no idea that today would change her life forever. A lesson in survival. The sun had barely risen over Willow Creek when Jaden and Emily stepped out of the small, patched-up shack into the cool morning air. The neighborhood was already stirring, vendors setting up their carts, tired workers heading out for another grueling day, and children playing barefoot on the cracked pavement. Emily clutched the small sack Jaden had given her the night before, unsure of what to expect. Her heart raced as she followed him through the winding streets, the air thick with the scent of damp concrete, fried food, and distant exhaust fumes. Jaden, meanwhile, moved with an effortless confidence, greeting familiar faces as they passed. "Morning, Miss Hattie," he called out to an elderly woman tending to a fruit stall. She waved back. "Morning, boy. Tell your mama I got fresh apples for her today." Emily watched in silence. This was his world, a place she had never set foot in, a place her parents had warned her about, told her to avoid at all costs. But it wasn't dangerous. It was alive. Jaden stopped in front of a small diner with faded red paint and a sign that read "Harris Home Cookin'." The smell of bacon and coffee drifted through the open door. "This is stop one," Jaden said, leading her inside. Emily hesitated. "What do we do here?" Jaden tossed her a rag. "We work." She blinked. "Wait, you actually?" "Yes, Emily. I actually work," Jaden said with a smirk. "Not all of us have maids, you know." Emily bit back a retort. Instead, she took in the sight of the small diner, scuffed wooden floors, checkered tablecloths, and tired but friendly faces. At the far end, a burly man in a grease-stained apron was flipping pancakes. "Jaden, my boy," the man boomed. "You're late." Jaden laughed. "Got caught up with royalty here." The man, Mr. Harris, glanced at Emily and raised an eyebrow. "You new around here?" Emily swallowed. Kind of." He nodded and tossed her a rag. "Then start wiping tables. We don't got time for fancy introductions." Emily hesitated, but Jaden nudged her. "Go on. It's not hard." She grumbled but got to work. At first, the cloth felt foreign in her hands, and she winced at every sticky spot she touched. But soon, she fell into a rhythm. Wipe, clear, repeat. By the time the morning rush hit, she was moving alongside Jaden, stacking plates, refilling water glasses, and even helping carry trays to the back. She barely realized how quickly time passed until Mr. Harris clapped his hands together. "All right, kids, break time." Jaden and Emily slumped into a booth. Mr. Harris placed 2 plates of eggs and toast in front of them. Emily's eyes widened. "We get free food." Jaden chuckled. "That's called earning your meal." She stared at her plate, then at him. This was the first meal she had ever truly worked for, and it tasted different, better. The next job: trash, treasure, and truths. After finishing their breakfast, Jaden led Emily down the street toward the park. "All right, princess, time for the next job." Emily scowled. "Do you have to call me that?" "Yes, because it annoys you. And that's fun for me." She rolled her eyes. "So, what's next?" Jaden stopped by a public trash bin and pointed. "This." Emily stared in horror. "You cannot be serious." Jaden laughed. "Dead serious. We collect recyclables. Bottles, cans, anything we can sell. You dig through garbage." "It's not garbage. It's money in the wrong place." Emily watched in disbelief as Jaden reached into the bin and pulled out a crushed soda can, tossing it into his sack. He looked at her expectantly. "Well, you gonna help or just stand there?" Emily groaned but crouched next to him. She reached into the bin, her nose wrinkling at the smell of old food and soda residue. She pulled out a sticky plastic bottle, holding it between 2 fingers like it was a venomous snake. Jaden burst out laughing. "Oh man, you're hopeless. I can't believe I'm doing this," she muttered. But as they continued, something shifted. At first, every bottle felt like a punishment, a reminder of how far she had fallen from her comfortable life. But then she looked at Jaden. He wasn't ashamed. He didn't see this as something degrading. He saw it as survival. A way to help his mother. A way to keep going. Emily frowned, gripping the bottle tighter before shoving it into her sack. Jaden grinned. "See, not so bad." Emily huffed. "It's disgusting. But I get it." He nudged her. "Welcome to my world." For the next 2 hours, they worked side by side. Emily's hands got dirty, her clothes got smudged, and her arms ached from carrying the sack. But for the first time in years, she felt real. By the time they reached the recycling center, Emily's sack was nearly full. The old man at the counter weighed their collections and handed Jaden a few crumpled bills. He counted it before splitting it in half and offering some to Emily. She blinked. "What are you doing?" "Your share, duh. You worked for it." Emily hesitated. No one had ever handed her money she had earned before. It felt different. She took it slowly, staring at the worn-out bills in her hands. "It's not much." Jaden shrugged. "It's enough for dinner. And that's what matters." Emily smiled. A small, genuine smile. "Jaden." He looked at her. "Thanks for showing me this." Jaden tilted his head. "What, garbage collecting?" Emily laughed. "No, life." Jaden's grin softened. "Anytime, princess." And for the first time in years, Emily felt like she had actually lived a day worth remembering. But little did she know, her time in Jaden's world was about to take an unexpected turn. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows over Willow Creek, painting the narrow streets in hues of amber and gold. Jaden and Emily, now carrying their meager earnings from their long day of work, made their way back through the winding alleys of the city's poorest district. Emily's arms ached from carrying the sack of recyclables, her feet were sore from walking, and her clothes, once pristine, were now stained with grime and dust. Yet, despite everything, she felt lighter. Jaden, noticing her thoughtful expression, grinned. "You look like you just discovered fire or something." Emily shook her head. "I've never actually worked for anything before. Not like this." Jaden quirked an eyebrow. "You mean you've never had a job?" "Nope. Never had to clean your own room, wash dishes." Emily cringed. "We have housekeepers for that." Jaden laughed, shaking his head. "Man, you've been missing out. Nothing builds character like scrubbing a toilet." Emily shot him a look. "I think I'll pass on that one." They walked in comfortable silence for a while, the rhythmic sound of their footsteps echoing down the cracked pavement. Then, Emily glanced at Jaden. "How long have you been doing this?" Jaden exhaled slowly. "Since I was 10. Emily's eyes widened. 10. That's so young." He shrugged. "My mom got sick when I was little. She worked as long as she could, but after a while, she just couldn't. So, I stepped up." Emily frowned. "That's not fair. You're just a kid." Jaden paused, his eyes darkening slightly. "Fair doesn't really exist in a place like this. You either work or you don't eat. Simple as that." Emily didn't know what to say to that. For all the things her parents had told her about life, they had never taught her about this kind of struggle. Jaden glanced at her and smirked, breaking the heavy moment. "Hey, don't look so sad. I'm not dead yet." Emily rolled her eyes. "That's a low bar, Jaden." He chuckled. "Maybe, but it works for me." They finally reached the tiny shack that Jaden and his mother called home. The sight of it, worn, patched, but filled with warmth, brought a strange sense of comfort to Emily. It wasn't much, but it felt real. Inside, Marie was sitting at the rickety table, sorting through an old sewing kit. When she looked up and saw them, she smiled. "Back already? How was the day?" Jaden plopped down on the only extra chair, stretching. Emily survived her first shift at the diner, and she only gagged twice digging through the trash. Emily shot him a glare. "That's an exaggeration." Marie chuckled. "Well, I'd say that deserves a reward." She reached for a small tin and pulled out 3 pieces of chocolate. Emily blinked. "Where did you get that?" Marie smiled. "A kind neighbor shared some with me, and I figured we could all use a little sweetness today." She handed one to Jaden, then one to Emily. Emily hesitated before taking it. It was just a small piece of chocolate, but the gesture felt enormous. Jaden popped his piece into his mouth immediately. "You're the best, Mom." Emily held hers for a moment before taking a bite. It wasn't the expensive, imported chocolate she was used to, but somehow it tasted better. It tasted like kindness, an unexpected visitor. As the evening settled, Emily helped Jaden and Marie prepare dinner. It wasn't much, just rice, beans, and some vegetables, but it was made with care. For the first time in her life, Emily sat at a table that didn't feel cold and distant. For the first time, she felt like part of something. And then, a knock on the door. Jaden froze mid-bite, his expression instantly wary. Marie's face tensed. Emily, sensing the shift in mood, stiffened. Who would be knocking this late? Jaden exchanged a look with his mother before standing and moving toward the door. "Stay here," he murmured. Emily watched as he slowly cracked it open. A large, shadowy figure stood in the doorway. Emily's stomach twisted as she saw the faint glint of a badge. A police officer. And he was looking right at her. "Miss Emily Carter, Her heart dropped. Your parents have been looking for you. Her world, the one she had finally begun to understand, came crashing down. The crossroad of two worlds. The room fell deathly silent. Emily's pulse thundered in her ears. Her parents. Jaden's expression darkened, his body shifting slightly in front of her, as if shielding her from the officer's gaze. Marie, despite her exhaustion, stood tall. "Officer, may I ask why you're here?" The officer's face remained unreadable. "There's been a city-wide search for Miss Carter. Her parents are worried sick." Emily clenched her fists. She didn't want to go back. Not yet. Jaden looked at her, his brown eyes searching hers for an answer. Did she want to stay? Did she want to leave? The officer took a step forward. "Miss Carter, please come with me." Marie placed a gentle hand on Emily's shoulder. "It's your choice, sweetheart." Emily's breath hitched. For the first time in her life, it was her choice. Her parents' world was waiting for her. The money, the security, the expectations. But Jaden's world, hard, dirty, exhausting, had given her something they never had. A voice. A purpose. She took a deep breath and made her decision. Everything was about to change. A choice between two worlds. The air inside Jaden's tiny shack felt heavy, suffocating with unspoken tension. The officer's presence was an unwelcome intrusion, a symbol of the world Emily had run from, the world that had found her once more. Jaden stood rigidly, arms crossed over his chest, his dark eyes locked onto the officer like he was some sort of enemy. Marie, despite her frail frame, placed a steady hand on Emily's shoulder. "Sweetheart, it's your choice," she said softly. Choice. Emily had never had one before. For years, her parents had dictated every aspect of her life. What she wore, what she studied, who she spoke to, how she behaved. Every moment was meticulously planned, leaving no room for uncertainty, no space for imperfection. And now she stood at the crossroads of two vastly different lives. She swallowed hard and looked at Jaden. He said nothing, but his jaw was clenched, his fingers tightening around his arms. Was he upset? Disappointed? Afraid? Emily turned back to the officer. "What happens if I don't go?" The man's expression barely changed. "Your parents have reported you as missing. If you don't come willingly, we'll have to take you back by force." Emily's stomach churned. So it wasn't really a choice. Not yet. She let out a shaky breath. "Can I say goodbye first?" The officer hesitated but nodded. "I'll wait outside. But don't take too long." With that, he stepped out, leaving the door slightly ajar. The sounds of the city at night drifted in. Distant sirens, muffled conversations, the rhythmic clatter of life continuing beyond these four fragile walls. Emily turned to Marie first. "I don't know what to say," Emily admitted. Marie smiled sadly. "Then just say what you feel." Emily bit her lip before speaking. "Thank you. For everything. I don't know what would have happened if Jaden hadn't found me that night." Marie cupped Emily's face gently. "You are always welcome here, sweetheart. No matter where life takes you." Emily nodded quickly, trying to blink back the stinging sensation in her eyes. Then she turned to Jaden. His expression was unreadable, but his shoulders were tense. For the first time since meeting him, she couldn't tell what he was thinking. Emily opened her mouth, but the words caught in her throat. Jaden, however, beat her to it. "You're really leaving?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. Emily hesitated. "I don't have a choice." His jaw tightened. "There's always a choice. You just don't like this one." She flinched. "That's not fair." Jaden exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "Neither is life, but you already knew that, didn't you?" Emily wanted to say something, to explain, to make him understand. But how could she? Instead, she stepped closer, reaching for his hand. He didn't pull away. Their fingers brushed, barely touching, before she whispered, "I'll find a way back. I promise." Jaden finally met her gaze. Promises don't mean much when you're locked in a mansion, princess. Emily's chest ached, but before she could say anything else, the officer's voice cut through the moment. It's time to go. Emily took one last look around the small home that had offered her more warmth in a few days than her own had in years. Then, with slow, reluctant steps, she followed the officer out into the night. And just like that, she was gone. The Carter estate, a golden cage. The drive back to her parents' estate felt longer than she remembered. Emily sat in the back of the sleek, black car, the leather seats cold against her skin. The world outside the window blurred past, the neon lights of the city giving way to the pristine, tree-lined streets of the wealthy district. Her home loomed ahead, a massive, gated mansion, its windows glowing softly like a beacon of everything she had once known. The car barely came to a full stop before the front doors burst open, and her mother rushed outside. Emily. Before she could react, she was pulled into a tight embrace. "Oh, my baby. We were so worried. We thought something had happened to you." Emily stood still, letting her mother hug her, but it felt different, hollow. Her father followed behind, his usually composed face lined with exhaustion. "Emily, why did you run away? What were you thinking?" Emily tensed. There it was. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "We're sorry." Just another expectation. Another reprimand. She pulled away from her mother, her heart hammering. "I needed space, Dad. I needed to breathe." Her mother's eyes shone with disbelief. "Space, Emily. We give you everything. The best tutors, the best schools, the best clothes." Emily snapped. "But you never gave me a choice." Her voice echoed through the vast estate, bouncing off the walls that had always felt more like a prison than a home. Her parents stared at her, stunned into silence. Emily felt the weight of everything she had bottled up crash into her at once. Do you even know what it's like to actually work for something? To wake up every day knowing that if you don't fight, you won't eat? Do you know what it feels like to be free? Her mother's face paled. "Emily, what are you talking about? Where did you even go?" Emily inhaled sharply, standing her ground. "With people who actually listened to me, who saw me as a person, not just a trophy to be displayed." Her father rubbed his temples, sighing heavily. "We're doing what's best for you, Emily. You have no idea how dangerous the world is outside these walls. You belong here." Emily's hands clenched into fists. "No, I belong where I feel alive." Silence filled the room. For the first time, her parents looked shaken. Her mother stepped forward, her voice softer now. "Emily, please, just stay home for now. We'll talk in the morning." Emily wanted to argue, wanted to run again, but she was exhausted. So without another word, she turned and walked upstairs to her room, shutting the door behind her. And for the first time in days, she felt truly alone. Meanwhile, back in Willow Creek, Jaden sat on the edge of the cot, staring at the door where Emily had just walked out. Mary sat beside him, resting a hand on his shoulder. "She didn't have a choice, Jaden." Jaden let out a bitter laugh. "There's always a choice, Mom. People like her just don't realize it." Murray sighed. "She's just a kid, just like you. Don't be so hard on her." Jaden ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "She said she'd come back." Murray studied him. "Do you believe her?" Jaden exhaled. Then, after a long pause, "I don't know." But deep down, a part of him hoped she would. Because despite everything, Emily Carter had changed his world, and he wasn't sure he wanted to go back to a world without her in it. A bird in a gilded cage. The morning light filtered through the tall, arched windows of Emily Carter's bedroom, painting golden streaks across the silk sheets and perfectly arranged pillows. Everything was immaculate, untouched, exactly as she had left it before she ran away. Yet she felt like a stranger in her own home. Emily sat on the edge of her massive canopy bed, staring at the polished floor beneath her bare feet. Her mind was still in Willow Creek. She could almost hear the sound of clinking bottles in Jaden's sack, the laughter of kids playing in the streets, the smell of frying bacon from Mr. Harris' diner. Her hands balled into fists. This place, her home, felt suffocating now. A soft knock at the door pulled her out of her thoughts. "Emily, can we talk?" Her mother's voice. Emily hesitated before answering. "It's open." The door swung open, and her mother and father stepped inside, both dressed in their usual expensive, perfectly pressed outfits. They looked tired, their faces lined with worry. But Emily felt no relief at seeing them. Her mother sat down beside her, reaching for her hands. "Sweetheart, you gave us such a scare. We thought something terrible had happened to you." Emily pulled her hands away. "Something did happen to me, Mom. I woke up." Her father sighed. "Emily, enough with the dramatics. We understand that you're upset, but running away was reckless." Emily snapped her head up, her blue eyes flashing. "You don't understand anything. You think I ran away because I was being rebellious. No, I left because I couldn't breathe in this house. I couldn't be perfect for you anymore." Her mother's face fell, but her father remained composed. "Emily, you have a bright future ahead of you, if you just focus." "On what?" "Being a puppet, a doll, living in a perfect little bubble while people like Jaden fight just to eat." Her father's jaw tightened at the mention of Jaden's name. "That boy. He's the one who took you in, isn't he?" Emily glared at him. "He didn't take me in like I was some lost pet. He saved me. He listened to me when you wouldn't. He showed me what life actually looks like outside of these stupid walls." Her mother's eyes filled with tears. "We just wanted to protect you." Emily exhaled sharply. "No, you wanted to control me. There's a difference." Her father pinched the bridge of his nose. "You don't understand the danger of people like him, Emily. People from those neighborhoods. They're desperate. They'll do anything to survive." Emily's rage boiled over. "You don't know a thing about him. He works harder than anyone I've ever met. He's not the dangerous one. You are. You with your money and your rules and your stupid, suffocating expectations. You destroy people and call it order." Her mother gasped. "Emily." But she wasn't finished. "I saw real life, Dad. And I saw real love. Jaden and his mother. They have nothing, but they have each other. And that's more than I've ever had with you two." The silence that followed was thick, suffocating, unbearable. Her father's voice was calm but cold. "You're our daughter, Emily. And you belong here. This is your home." Emily looked around at the lavish furniture, the grand chandeliers, the priceless paintings hanging on the walls. No, this wasn't home. Not anymore. Jaden's world without her back in Willow Creek. Jaden tried to move on. He told himself it was stupid to believe Emily would come back. She belonged in her world, not his. And yet, every time he passed Starlight Bridge, he thought of her. Every time he saw someone struggling with a heavy load, he remembered her complaints about carrying the sack of recyclables. Every time he walked into the diner, he imagined her trying to balance trays and failing miserably. "You miss her, don't you?" Jaden turned to see his mother watching him from her cot, her knowing eyes filled with warmth. "No," he muttered, looking away. Marie chuckled. "Liar." Jaden sighed, sitting beside her. "She's gone, Mom. She went back to her perfect life. I told you she wouldn't stay." Marie patted his knee gently. "She's just a kid, sweetheart. And she's figuring things out. Maybe she doesn't know how to come back yet." Jaden scoffed. "Or maybe she realized she was better off without us." Marie gave him a knowing smile. "If that were true, you wouldn't still be thinking about her. And I bet she's thinking about you too." Jaden wanted to believe that. But hope was dangerous. Hope made you believe in things that weren't real. Emily wasn't coming back, and he needed to accept that. A plan and a risk. 3 days passed. Emily didn't eat much. She barely spoke. She avoided her parents as much as she could. And then, one night, she made her decision. She wasn't staying. She was going back. But this time, she wasn't just going back to see Jaden. She was going to help him. Emily waited until the mansion was quiet, her parents asleep in their separate bedrooms, the security guards making their rounds on predictable schedules. She packed only what she needed: money, food, a change of clothes. Then she slipped out the back door, heart pounding as she stepped into the night. She didn't call a driver. She didn't take the family car. She walked. Through the streets she had never stepped foot in alone. Through the city that was no longer just a backdrop to her privileged life. She walked until the towering mansions disappeared behind her, until the streets grew narrower, dirtier, more alive. She walked until she reached the only home that had ever felt real. She knocked on the door. And when it opened, Jaden stood there, eyes wide with shock. Emily smiled. "I told you I'd come back." Jaden stared at her like she had just materialized out of thin air. Then, before she could say another word, he pulled her into a tight hug. She let out a small laugh, hugging him back. Marie, watching from inside, smiled knowingly. Emily pulled back slightly, looking Jaden in the eyes. "I'm not just here to visit. I have a plan. And you're coming with me." Jaden raised an eyebrow. "A plan? For what?" Emily's expression hardened with determination. "To change everything." And just like that, the real fight began. A fight for freedom and a future. The night air in Willow Creek was thick with the scent of damp streets and distant city lights. Jaden stood frozen in the doorway of his tiny shack, staring at Emily like she was an illusion. She wasn't supposed to be here. She had left, gone back to her perfect world, her mansion, her life of comfort. And yet here she was, standing in front of him, her blue eyes blazing with determination. "You're really here," Jaden muttered, still unable to believe it. Emily grinned. "I told you I'd come back." For a moment, they just stood there, two kids from opposite worlds, ****one raised in privilege, the other in struggle, now standing together again, as if the universe itself had refused to let them part. Then, before Jaden could say another word, Emily threw her arms around him. Jaden stiffened for a second, then let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He hugged her back. It wasn't just relief. It was something deeper, something neither of them fully understood. Marie, watching from inside, smiled softly. "Come in, sweetheart. You must be exhausted." Emily stepped inside, the tiny shack feeling more like home than her mansion ever had. She let out a deep breath, rubbing her arms. Jaden shut the door and crossed his arms. "All right, princess. Spill it. Why are you really here?" Emily's expression hardened. "I have a plan." Jaden raised an eyebrow. "A plan? For what?" Emily met his gaze, unwavering. "To change everything." Jaden stared at her, his skepticism obvious. "That's cute, but change what exactly?" "My whole life. This neighborhood. The fact that people like me barely survive, while people like you waste money on gold-plated toilets." Emily sighed, shaking her head. "Jaden, I know you don't trust me yet. I get it. But I'm not here to throw money at the problem. I'm here because I finally understand how messed up this system is, and I want to do something about it." Jaden scoffed. "And what, exactly, can you do?" "Walk up to your daddy and ask him to fix poverty." Emily gritted her teeth. "No, but I can start by helping you." Jaden narrowed his eyes. "Help me how?" Emily took a deep breath. "I have money, Jaden. Not my parents' money. My own. Savings, allowances, things I've stashed away. I can use it to get you out of here." Jaden went completely still. Marie, who had been listening silently, finally spoke up. "Out of here." Emily nodded. "To a better school. A real education. A future that doesn't involve digging through trash just to survive." Jaden let out a bitter laugh. "That sounds real nice, Emily. But you're forgetting something. Even if you throw money at a problem, it doesn't make it disappear. People like me don't get those kinds of opportunities. Not really. Emily stepped forward, her eyes blazing. They do if they fight for them. And I'm going to fight with you. Jaden met her gaze, searching for any trace of hesitation, any sign that this was just another rich girl's fantasy. But there was none. She meant it. And for the first time, in a long time, Jaden let himself believe. The battle begins. The next few days were a whirlwind. Emily had never planned a rebellion before, but if there was one thing she knew, it was how to navigate the world of the wealthy. She met Jaden at a small library in town, sitting across from him with a notebook filled with plans. "All right, here's the deal," she said, flipping open the pages. "I found a school. Not some elite private academy, but a place that actually helps kids like you. Kids with talent, with drive, but no money. It's hard to get into, but I think we can do it." Jaden glanced at the notebook, eyebrows raised. "And you think I have talent?" Emily smirked. "You're smart, Jaden. Smarter than half the kids I grew up with. And I know you work harder than all of them combined. That's more than enough." Jaden snorted. "Flattery won't get you anywhere, princess." "It's not flattery if it's true," Emily shot back. Marie, who was listening from across the table, smiled. "I think it's a good idea, Jaden. A real chance." Jaden sighed, leaning back in his chair. "All right, let's say I actually go along with this crazy plan. How do you even get me into this school?" Emily grinned, tapping her notebook. "Connections, Jaden. My parents may not listen to me, but their name still carries weight. I can get you an interview. After that, it's all on you." Jaden tilted his head, considering it. "And if I fail?" Emily's expression softened. "Then we try again, and again, until we win." Jaden exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "You really don't quit, do you?" Emily smirked. "Nope. Get used to it." The interview. 3 days later, Jaden walked into the office of an elite preparatory school, wearing a borrowed button-down shirt and the most serious expression Emily had ever seen on him. She waited outside, pacing, her stomach a mess of nerves. The interview lasted an hour. When Jaden finally stepped out, his expression was unreadable. Emily rushed to him. "Well, what happened?" Jaden stared at her for a long second, then grinned. "They accepted me." Emily let out a choked laugh before launching herself at him in a hug. Jaden, caught off guard, stumbled but held her tight. "Easy, princess. You're gonna kill me." She pulled back, beaming. "You did it, Jaden. You're getting out." Jaden's smile faltered for just a second. "Yeah, but what about you?" Emily's smile dimmed. She hadn't thought that far ahead. Did she even belong in her old world anymore? Before she could answer, Jaden nudged her. "We'll figure it out, princess, one step at a time." She nodded, feeling something she hadn't in years. Hope. And this time, it was real. Epilogue. A future worth fighting for. A year later, Jaden stood on the steps of his new school, a real school, looking out at the city skyline in the distance. Beside him, Emily leaned against the railing, smirking. "So how does it feel to be a student and not a full-time garbage collector?" Jaden chuckled. "Weird, but good." Emily nudged him. "Told you we'd win." Jaden glanced at her, something unreadable in his eyes. "Yeah, you did." Emily grinned, turning back to the city. "This is just the beginning, Jaden. We're gonna change everything." Jaden watched her for a moment, then smiled. "Yeah, we are." And for the first time, they both knew they had finally found their place in the world. A future built on choices. The cool breeze swept through the school courtyard, rustling the trees as Jaden and Emily stood side by side, watching the sun dip below the city skyline. It had been a long year, a year of hard work, risks, and battles fought both inside and outside themselves. But they had made it. Jaden adjusted the strap of his backpack, still finding it strange that he no longer carried a sack of recyclables on his shoulders. Instead, he carried textbooks, notebooks, and the weight of expectations. But this time, they were his own. Emily turned to him, her arms crossed, a playful smirk tugging at her lips. "You're staring at the city like it personally offended you." Jaden chuckled, shaking his head. "Just thinking. Oh, should I be concerned?" He rolled his eyes. "Nah, just trying to wrap my head around everything. A year ago, I was barely getting by. Now I'm in a school where the teachers actually know my name, and I don't have to worry about whether I'll eat dinner." Emily's smirk softened into something more genuine. "We fought for this. You fought for this." Jaden exhaled, leaning on the railing. "Yeah, but there's still so much I want to do." Emily tilted her head. "Like what?" Jaden hesitated, then turned to face her fully. "I want to go back." Emily blinked. "What?" Jaden's gaze was steady, determined. "To Willow Creek. To the people who are still struggling. Just because I got out doesn't mean the fight is over. There are other kids like me, kids who need a chance. A real one." Emily studied him for a long moment. Then she grinned. "I was hoping you'd say that." Jaden raised an eyebrow. "You already have a plan, don't you?" Emily laughed, nudging him with her elbow. "Please, I had a plan before you even realized you wanted one." Jaden chuckled. "Of course you did." Emily's voice turned more serious. "I've been thinking about this for a while. We have connections now. Your teachers, my parents' network, even some of the people from the community who helped us. We can start something real." Jaden's eyes narrowed in curiosity. "Start what?" Emily's grin widened. "A scholarship program." Jaden's breath caught. "Think about it, Jaden. We find kids like you, kids who work hard but don't have the resources to escape. We raise money, we give them opportunities, and we help them build their futures." Jaden stared at her, his mind racing. It made sense. It was everything he had wanted but never knew how to achieve. He looked at Emily, the girl who had once stood on a bridge ready to end her life, the girl who had stepped into his world and refused to walk away. She had changed everything. And now they would change everything together. Jaden nodded, a slow smile spreading across his face. "You really don't stop, do you?" Emily shrugged. "Nope. Get used to it." They stood there for a moment, watching the city that had tried to keep them in separate worlds. Not anymore. Now they would tear down the walls that had divided them. Together. Epilogue. A legacy begins. 3 years later, a large banner hung across the entrance of Willow Creek Community Center. The Carter Scholarship Fund. The place was buzzing with energy. Dozens of young students, families, and community leaders had gathered for the launch of the program that Jaden and Emily had spent years building from the ground up. Jaden stood at the front of the crowd, now 18 years old, dressed in a crisp shirt, holding a microphone in his hands. He looked out at the faces before him, kids who reminded him of himself. He took a deep breath and smiled. 3 years ago, I was where a lot of you are today. Struggling, wondering if there was any way out, thinking the world had already decided my future for me." He paused, glancing at Emily, who stood proudly beside him. "But someone showed me that I had a choice, that I wasn't alone." Emily gave him a playful wink, and he chuckled before continuing. "This program is here to do the same for you, to give you what I was given, a chance." Applause erupted through the room. Marie, standing in the front row, wiped a proud tear from her eye. Emily's parents were there too, not just as donors, but as supporters. They had changed too. And now, as Jaden and Emily stood together, they knew this was only the beginning. Their fight wasn't over. It was just getting started. Because change didn't come from money or power alone. It came from people. And together, they were unstoppable.